What if someone could be lost? Not in some distant wilderness, not in the middle of nowhere, but while speaking to their parents on the phone? And what if the final words they heard still echo unanswered to this day? On a quiet night in May of 2008, Brandon Swanson vanished without a trace. No screams, no struggle, no body, no explanation. Only a phone call that ended in a way that would haunt his family forever. This is not just a disappearance. This is one of the most unsettling, unsolved cases in modern American history. And the truth may be closer than anyone realizes. Brandon Swanson was a 19-year-old college student from Marshall, Minnesota. By all accounts, he was responsible, intelligent, and close to his family. He had just finished his first year at Minnesota West Community and Technical College, where he studied wind energy technology. He had plans, he had a future. And on the night of May 13, 2008, he was simply doing what thousands of young people do every year, celebrating the end of the semester with friends. Earlier that evening, Brandon attended a small gathering in Canby, Minnesota, a town about 30 miles from his home. He left around midnight, planning to drive back to Marshall. It was a familiar route, a straight drive through quiet rural roads surrounded by farmland, gravel paths, and open fields. Nothing dangerous, nothing unusual, at least not at first. Sometime after leaving the party, Brandon took a wrong turn. His car slid into a ditch along a gravel road. The vehicle wasn't badly damaged. Brandon wasn't injured. He tried to get the car out, but it was stuck. Instead of calling for help immediately, he did what many people would do. He started walking. Shortly after 1:15 a.m., Brandon called his parents. Calm, clear, not panicked. He told them his car was stuck and that he was walking toward what he believed were the lights of the nearby town of Lind. He was confident he knew where he was. His parents, Brian and Annette Swanson, got into their car and began driving to pick him up. And that's when everything slowly began to unravel. As Brandon walked, he stayed on the phone with his parents. For nearly 45 minutes, they talked continuously. Brandon described what he could see: fields, gravel roads, and distant lights. He believed he was heading in the right direction. But as his parents drove through Lind, something became clear. They couldn't see him. They drove up and down roads. They flashed their headlights. They honked the horn. They even yelled his name into the night. But Brandon couldn't see them either, and that didn't make sense. Confusion started to creep into the conversation. Brandon insisted he could see the town lights. His parents insisted they were in the town, and he wasn't there. At one point, Brandon admitted something unsettling. He said the lights he had been following seemed to be moving. Still, he didn't sound afraid, just puzzled. Then something changed. While still on the phone, Brandon suddenly said he had just fallen. He mentioned climbing over what he thought was a fence. There was a pause, a brief silence. And then his parents heard something that would mark the last known moment of Brandon Swanson's life. Oh shit. The line went dead. His parents tried calling back immediately. No answer. Again and again, nothing. They drove frantically through the area, calling his name, searching fields, roads, and ditches until dawn. When the sun came up and Brandon was still missing, they contacted the police. What followed was one of the largest search efforts in the region's history. Authorities quickly located Brandon's car, still stuck in the ditch. Exactly where he said it was. The keys were inside. His glasses were still there. Nothing suggested foul play. Nothing suggested he planned to disappear. It was as if he had simply walked away and vanished into the darkness. Search teams combed the area for days. Hundreds of volunteers, search dogs, helicopters, divers. They searched fields, rivers, ravines, and drainage ditches. Not far from where Brandon disappeared runs the Yellow Medicine River, along with several creeks, including the Mud Creek, which flows through thick vegetation and steep banks. Despite the exhaustive search, they found nothing. No clothing, no phone, no footprints, no sign Brandon had ever been there. Investigators later determined something critical. Brandon had been mistaken about his location. He wasn't walking toward Lind at all. He was moving in the opposite direction, farther away from help. The lights he thought were town lights were likely farm lights, reflections, or distant highways distorted by darkness and fatigue. And the fence he mentioned climbing over, it was almost certainly the edge of the riverbank. That final fall may not have been minor. One theory suggests Brandon fell into the Yellow Medicine River, or Mud Creek, and drowned. But this theory raises disturbing questions. Why was no body ever recovered? Why was his phone never found? And how could someone disappear so completely in such a relatively small and heavily searched area? Over the years, the Swanson family has refused to give up. They've returned to the area countless times. They've pushed for renewed searches. They've spoken publicly to keep Brandon's story alive. His mother, Annette, has stated that not knowing is worse than any answer. Some investigators believe Brandon may have fallen into deep water, become trapped under debris, or been carried away by currents. Others suggest exposure, injury, or disorientation played a role. And then there are those who believe something else happened. Something we still don't understand. There are strange elements to this case that continue to unsettle people. The length of the phone call. The fact that Brandon was coherent almost the entire time. The sudden silence after his last words. And the complete absence of physical evidence. In many missing persons cases, time works against the truth. Evidence fades, memories blur, landscapes change, and eventually questions are left unanswered. More than a decade later, Brandon Swanson remains missing. No confirmed sightings, no discoveries, no closure, only a phone call that ended too abruptly, and a family forever suspended between hope and grief. Cases like Brandon's remind us how fragile certainty can be, how easily direction becomes confusion, how quickly normal can turn into nightmare, and how sometimes the most terrifying mysteries are not about what we see, but about what we never find. Somewhere in the quiet fields of Minnesota, a story remains unfinished, and until answers are found, Brandon Swanson's final words will continue to echo through the darkness. Whether you believe it was an accident, a tragic miscalculation, or something more unsettling, one thing is certain: this story is far from over.